Hey, what's up you guys? My name is Zach and this is going to be a video about how we took an old closet door from our 1930s house and made it into a headboard for our master bedroom. So one of the first projects actually was we had to renovate one of the closets in our master bedroom, and we took off this closet door and replaced it with a double door. Just gave us more access, but the door was solid, and so I held on to it, and a couple months ago I was like, oh man, if I just stripped all that paint off and refinished it, I bet it would make a great headboard. And while I wasn't wrong, I definitely underestimated how difficult it would be to get through all 5 layers of paint and a little bit of finish. This is our first go at actually really trying a chemical stripper. There's definitely some things I would have done differently. It was about 2 to 3 days. This is the second day right here. I ended up starting to use paper towel like you see to actually try to keep the stripper from drying out. It was very dry and cold outside all of these days, so I think that was hurting my chances of the reaction actually happening. So I started getting a little frustrated and just tried to go and sand my way through it. Unfortunately, it just loaded the sanding pads way too quickly and I was back to the stripper. My phone actually did die recording that last time lapse, so this is where I ended up after that last round of stripper. As you could see, it wasn't too bad. We were definitely getting close. There were still some small stubborn areas of paint stuck, but the bulk was off by this point. So now, both by hand with some 80 grit and then 80 grit on a little hand sander, I was just going in and trying to take even more off. The problem with some of these base layers of paint, even those little small areas, they did just such a great job at loading up the sandpaper pad and making it where it wouldn't even sand anymore, so I just had to keep going through paper. At some point though, I had to just take a break from the sanding. It was starting to get kind of frustrating, so I at least thought I would square up the door. The door had been shimmed and trimmed, and basically every single time the house settled, the door would get cut to make sure it would still close, so I had to square it back up, and that's what you're seeing here. And even my makeshift track saw wasn't long enough to make the length of the door, so yeah, you'll see I do it in 2 cuts, but I was actually pretty happily surprised at how straight I was able to get the cut doing it that way. So now that I had the door squared up, I basically had no excuses. I had to go back in and get the remainder of the paint off. Arguably the biggest challenge during this stripping process was actually getting all of these grooves clean. All this decorative molding was really grabbing and clinging to these layers of paint, and the chemical stripper was really having a hard time getting through it. You'll see here I really just started resorting to just chipping away at it by hand. I had a sharp putty knife that I just bought for this project that I knew I'd probably either just clean or throw away afterwards, that I was just getting in there like you're seeing here and just chipping away. One of my friends at work actually suggested during this project, when I was telling him that I was doing this by hand, to go back in, use a brass brush with some of that chemical stripper and try to get it out that way. And that worked. The brush would kind of gunk up and ended up repainting some of that melted paint back on the wood, so it took some back and forth cleaning the brush in between passes with mineral spirits. We got to a good spot. You could see that residue that I still had to go through, but I just had to sand through that. I couldn't scrape it off. So I sanded from 80 grit, I want to say all the way up to 220 if I remember correctly. And in between all the sanding passes, I was making sure I was just blowing off all the dust to keep the pads from getting loaded, just using my leaf blower. This is probably day 4 or 5 of working on this project, and it was pretty cold outside, so I was very relieved to finally get to the point where I could sand it. Now, once I did the bulk of the sanding outside, I finally brought it down into my basement, into my little shop. I still had to hand sand a lot of these grooves out, but I was done being outside, so inside we went. Now, this was very slow moving. I had 80 grit. Doing it by hand, it just did not want to lift that red pigment from the base layer of that red paint in the same way that the electric sander did. I was trying not to lose too much hope or get too frustrated, but at some point actually here I switched over to my multi-tool, decided to put a sanding pad on it and see if I can make any progress doing it that way. This was a gift actually for Christmas, so this is me trying to figure out how to get the sanding attachment off for the first time. There we go. And so the multi-tool, I would say it worked pretty well. You could see the sanding pad's a little oversized, and I was trying not to mess up the edges too much. Like, I really don't want to lose a lot of the detail that was preserved in the door. So on Amazon, I actually ended up buying smaller sanding pads that I was able to attach, and those worked pretty well. Unfortunately, I deleted those videos. It's been a long time since I've made a video, so my file storage and sorting was not top notch, but finally done with sanding on the door. It felt so great to be at this point, and now I was at the point where I was taking some measurements and getting ready to go to Home Depot and buy some wood. I didn't really end up having to buy too much. I was trying to do this project pretty minimally. I liked the design of the door as is. I knew it would need a little crown molding just to kind of make it look less like a door that's horizontal and more like a headboard. You'll see this is kind of my layout coming together. Just a piece of crown molding across the top and then some pine on the left. It was right around this time where I started realizing that the door was probably made out of a Douglas fir. So I bought pine that was in pretty decent condition. It wasn't too warped. This is me squaring off that pine for the legs. And I'm basically creating a notch in both legs for the door to actually sit on. I didn't want the pocket screws I would eventually use to actually take all the weight, especially in like shearing loading. So this notch would basically just give it a little bit of mechanical strength by just letting that door sit on top of something. In the back of my head right now, I'm thinking, how am I going to match this yellowish pine to the red fir? But that was a problem for another day. Right now, I was just getting everything cut, getting everything laid out, and I'd worry about finishing in a couple days. So you'll see this is the layout actually coming together. So I actually carried up the pieces upstairs and kind of clamped them and was just trying to get a general idea for how tall we wanted it to be. So the first thing we saw is that we needed to take off at least 4 inches from what I originally thought we wanted in terms of height. So this is me laying out and measuring for the crown molding headboard cap. I figured it would make it look, again, less like a door, more like a headboard, and it would basically wrap around the legs and the door and kind of make it a little bit more cohesive. And now just checking to make sure that those two 45s are actually making a 90. And they were, thank goodness. Once I had these little ends cut, I just was going to tack it around a piece of 1x2, and that whole thing would basically slide over the assembly. So I ended up gluing all the pieces together. I'm using the clamps actually just to help me align things, and then just tacking it through with the brad nailer. And now the thought was just to take this entire thing and basically just place it over and either tack it in or screw it. I hadn't decided by this point, and attach it to the entire assembly right on top of the door and the legs. Now while that dried, I spent some time making actually a little 2x4 bracket to attach the headboard to the base of the bed. So now finally I got to the point where I was like, all right, I need to at least kind of get this pine close to the fir. So I did a little test where you used 3 different types of poly and 2 different types of wood stain to see what matched the best. But these two on the right, that MinWax fast drying poly, and then that wood stain is what I ended up using. So now I'm going through and just sanding through all the grits for the pine pieces. And I'm just cleaning them up here with some odorless mineral spirits. So right here I'm actually applying a pre-stained wood conditioner. Never used it before, but I've heard it's pretty easy to use, and I will say that I think it actually did a great job at preventing any blotchiness in all these pine pieces. And I didn't end up using it on the door because the door I just did the polyurethane and let the natural wood grain kind of do its thing, but this did great. Now I'm applying that stain that I picked out from earlier. It was an oil-based stain, so I basically had all the fans in my basement going and I was still wearing my respirator. It felt so great to be at this point. I was just wiping the stain on, letting it sit for a little bit, wiping it off. It went pretty easily. I only let that wood conditioner sit for probably like 20-25 minutes, which is what the bottle said, and I was pretty happy with how it was coming out. This is after the first coat, and I actually do one more coat. And now I'm just applying that second coat. You'll see that this isn't the most pigmented stain. I really try to avoid wood stain when I can. I'm not a huge fan of how it looks, but this was just out of necessity to try to match this pine at least as closely as I could to the door. So I was trying to at least keep things as natural as possible, and I think that did a pretty good job with the stain that we picked. Now this is what it looks like after the second coat. Just a fair warning, you're about to see that as I shift to the other part of my shop, the lighting changes and it's gonna look like I spray painted these orange. I promise I did not. Boom, there it is. So now I'm just putting on that polyurethane, and again, I didn't do anything between the two videos, it's just the lighting shift. But I'm putting on a semi-gloss wipe-on polyurethane from MinWax. This stuff was super easy to work with. It went on real easy. Same thing as a stain. Let it get on there nice and thick and make sure I covered everything, and then just kind of wiped off any of the excess. Now I won't lie, this next part felt awesome. There were so many times during the last couple of weeks where trying to scrape some of the paint and gunk out of like the nooks and crannies, I was just thinking I should totally just paint this thing, but I'm very glad I stuck it out and was able to get to this point. This is the picture that I finally sent all my family and friends. I was like, we made it. We're getting so close. Before the second and final coat, I was just sanding real light with, I think, like 320 grit. So right here, I'm feeling all proud of myself until I realized that I had forgotten to cut the slots for the pocket holes in the back of the door. I definitely wanted to do this before applying the finish. That way, obviously, wasn't messing up with the jig, but I just used a rag in between the clamp and it worked okay. I was thinking about using wood glue or other type of joinery to connect all these pieces, but the issue is that both steps to my basement and steps to our upstairs are extremely narrow, and there was no way this headboard was fitting. So I basically had to make this thing in pieces, get it upstairs, and assemble it upstairs. So I just figured pocket holes were the easiest way to get that accomplished. It also means that one day down the road, if we ever leave this house, I can just disassemble it and reassemble it in the new house. Now all that was left was to get all the pieces upstairs and get it assembled and get it attached to the bed. These sleep numbers are heavy. So now you can see that 2x4 bracket I kind of put together. Now I just kind of had to get this thing set. I wanted the headboard to be as close to the edge of the bed as possible so there wasn't a huge gap off the back of the bed. I basically just clamped it, got it as close to square, got a bolt in, did that on either end, and then added in the second bolt on all four of the braces. So with the bracket on the bed, all that was left to do was put the legs and the headboard cap on the door. So using those pre-drilled pocket holes, I'm going through and adding in all those screws. The width of the legs and the width of the door were the same, so I was just using my hands here just best I could to keep everything in plane. Finally got everything attached, and this is about to be my first reveal. Make sure you hit the chair whenever you're moving something you worked on for 3 weeks. So I thought that I might have to sand or plane the edges of either leg just to get this headboard cap to fit on, but I was very, very happily surprised to see that it slid right on. And now the last step was just putting on, I think, 4 or 5 little pocket screws just to hold that headboard cap on. And now this is my first look at it all together. So now the final part, just get it in there. Basically, I just had my fiance help me. We held it up against the wall. And now since I had the bracket already on the bed frame, I just kind of used the bed frame to wedge the headboard up against the wall. And the only thing I did off camera is I just put in some wood screws to hold the bracket to the legs. That was after I leveled it, of course. I had to shim the one side. If you ever build anything in a 100-year-old house, you'll know that you're gonna have to either choose square or level. It can't be both. But after looking at it, we're like, all right, that's pretty good. So I got screwed in, and it was time for one final time lapse. And here we go. This is the final look. I'm really happy with it. You can see here that in certain lighting, especially during certain times of the day, it's pretty apparent that it is two different types of wood, one stained and one not, but I think over time as the oil-based poly starts kind of ambering both pieces of wood, that they'll start getting a little bit closer in shade. But overall, it matches the furniture in our room really well. It was a pretty grueling project when it probably didn't have to be, but it's pretty cool knowing that that came from this old closet door that I started on like about 4 weeks ago. And that's it. I really hope you guys enjoyed watching the video. I really enjoyed making both the headboard and the video. I was making the music that I was using in the background there as well, so I really did enjoy it. I hope you guys did too, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.